The Massacre at Firth Asylum. Amy was bouncing in her seat, muttering, "Come on, come on, come on." The gun cam was in the old cafeteria, trained on the door to the hallway. The other two guys, Flashlight Guy and Donnie, ran past. The camera swung around to find Donnie helping Flashlight climb up through the basement window. To Frito, Amy said, "They're almost out. Get ready." It was taking forever. Flashlight Guy was stuck in the window for some reason, his legs kicking but not making any forward progress. Josh kept swinging his gun/camera back to the door to see if they were being pursued. Shrieking. Not screaming. This was the kind of noise babies make when they don't know how to put their pain into words. It was Flashlight Guy. His legs were thrashing in the window. Something had him from the other end. Josh and Donnie grabbed his legs, trying to pull him back into the classroom. They pulled and pulled, and whatever had Flashlight from the other end finally let go. Of his legs, anyway. Josh and Donnie found themselves on the floor of the classroom, with the lower half of Flashlight Guy twitching in their lap. Everything from the waist up was still laying in the basement window. If Josh and Donnie hadn't had earmuffs on, they could have heard Amy scream from the RV. Josh scrambled to his feet. He trained the gun cam on the window and the twitching and now silent pile of meat that was Flashlight's torso. It appeared that something was ripping away at his guts from below, something coming out of the grass, like it had emerged from the earth itself and torn him in half. Josh shot at it, the Roman candle shells blowing Flashlight's guts apart and sending fire streaking into the night beyond the window. Amy flinched. She and Frito saw the glowing projectiles streak across the windshield from the side of the building. The view on the monitor was chaos. Donnie and Josh were arguing. Then Josh yelled, "The door! Watch the door!" And more shots were fired. Sharp reports that echoed through the night air. Donnie screamed until his screaming parts were ripped out of his throat. The gun cam raced toward the basement window, which was still blocked by the ravaged remains of Flashlight Guy. The view flew through the window, Josh tossing the gun through ahead of him, and it spun around in the grass until Amy found her video feed was showing the very RV where she was sitting in the distance, weeds partially obstructing the view. Through the camera's mic, Amy heard a sound like a sponge being wrung out in a sink full of water. Josh screamed and then made a series of harsh grunts. The gun cam was still sitting motionless in the grass. Amy looked over the laptop at the building, then back down at the camera feed. Back and forth, looking for something. Anything. On the laptop, the camera view suddenly moved, being dragged backward through the weeds. The view swung around. Josh's face came into view, laying on the ground, blood pouring from his mouth. He was grabbing the gun by the barrel, pulling it toward him. He was doing something with his other hand, reaching around. His mouth was wide open, making choking noises. Something came up in his throat. His eyes got wide, and Amy had a split second to see a fist-sized wad of Josh's own intestines push out between his teeth before he pulled the trigger and blew his own head off. Amy jumped to her feet, the laptop clattering to the floor of the RV. She had her hand over her mouth. Frito had heard the shot. What? What's happening? We have to go, Frito. We have to go, and we have to go now. We have to go. We have to... What? What happened? Go, Frito. They're dead. They're all dead. Go, please. You don't know that. We don't leave men behind. Frito threw the RV into gear and floored it. Instead of backing out onto the street, he plowed forward, across the lawn and toward the building. Amy stumbled back up to the passenger seat. What are you doing? Look, they're still alive. They're moving. The RV skidded to a stop outside the basement window. On the ground, in the shadows, something was in fact moving. No, Frito, just go. We have to get out of here. Frito yelled. Josh, Donnie, answer if you're alive. Someone was out there, between the RV and the wall. A lumpy, almost human figure. Frito peered out at it. Amy hissed. Don't, Frito, don't. Back up, please. Back up the RV. Frito reached inside his jacket and pulled out a serious-looking black handgun. He said, Donnie? No answer. Frito aimed the handgun at the figure, the glass of the driver's side door between him and his target. Amy could see Frito's face reflected in the glass. His eyes went wide. He had time to say, "Holy shit," before a series of things happened so quickly that Amy's mind couldn't register them all. While Frito had been focused on the figure out of the driver's side door, something smashed through the windshield to his right. Something, a long pink blur, whipped in through the glass, grabbed Frito's right bicep, and neatly severed it. The arm, with the hand at the end still clutching the pistol, was yanked through the windshield and out into the night. Before Frito could scream or even turn to see what had happened, the arm poked back through the broken windshield, now with the gun end aimed at Frito. Frito's own hand, now being operated by whatever was outside the RV, squeezed the trigger. Frito's skull exploded. All of this occurred over the course of 2.5 seconds. To Amy, all she registered was the shattering of glass, a wet, meaty rip, and a gunshot. Then she was covered in bits of glass and droplets of warm blood. Frito slumped over, dead. A trial by the fire. Owen was pointing a gun at my head. An impromptu late-night tribunal had formed around the quarantine bonfire. I shivered, The fire had that campfire effect of making your front too hot and your back too cold. Owen had waited in the boiler room for somebody to come crawling back through, fleeing whatever violence had erupted on the other end. He waited patiently through hellish echoes of shotgun blasts and screams. Waited as the report of machine gun and shotguns ended the screams one by one. He waited while I screamed into the tunnel for TJ, or Hope, or Corey, or anyone. He watched me throw up in the corner and waited while I put my head in my hands and heard those screams echo through my head, over and over and over again. Then I had a gun at my forehead, and he was pulling me to my feet. 5 minutes later, I was standing in a crowd of red jumpsuits. Everybody was out of bed. The echoing rattle of gunshots from a few blocks down the street, right on the back of the mysterious flares that came from the same direction, had everyone awake and at DEFCON 1. From behind the 9mm, Owen said, "Now that you got everybody's attention, why don't you tell them what that shooting was about?" I was so tired. It was the unique type of exhaustion that comes from failure on top of failure. Futility and fuck-ups take a lot out of a man. I should know, since that was pretty much my whole life up to this point. I didn't have the energy to defend myself. Those goddamn screams. Look, do what you want, Owen, but don't make a show out of it. Huh, a show? That's what you think this is, bro? He shook his head. All right. Allow me to summarize for the fucking jury. You and TJ found an escape tunnel. Instead of telling the camp about it, you tiptoed around, gathered up your green clique, and tried to crawl out while everybody else was asleep. You left behind sick people. You left behind pregnant women. You left behind moms who ain't seen their kids since the outbreak. They still have drones buzzing around up there. If suddenly the population of this place goes from 300 to 0, and a goddamn crowd spontaneously forms outside the fence, they're gonna figure out what happened. And then they're gonna rain holy hell down on that crowd. It was either a few of us go, or nobody. And of course, you get to make that decision. All on your own, don't you? See, because none of us are as smart as you. We couldn't have organized a way to do it without dooming the entire quarantine. No. Only you. I shrugged. You'd have stopped us, Owen, and you know it. You'd have started sticking that gun in everybody's face, same as you're doing now. And why would I ever do such a thing? Because I'm an asshole, right? Here, why don't you tell everybody what happened to all your friends who crawled into the tunnel? We don't necessarily know. We heard gunshots, and what happened to them is exactly what I have been saying would happen to anybody who tried to make a break for it. It's what I would have explained to you again if you'd asked. Because from the first day that gate closed on this quarantine, I said that anybody who crossed that line was gonna die. Because as far as anybody outside of that fence knows, every single one of us is tainted And that fence is the only thing keeping back a tide that will turn the fucking rivers into blood. That means all of us in here got to band together. But you, TJ, and the rest of you Greens, you never got that. I shook my head. No. The difference is that we had a chance at freedom, and we were willing to take it. Unlike you. Uh-huh. And just to be clear, you were going to be among the escapees, right? If I'd have shown up 5 seconds later than I did. Hell yeah. You don't even know what I'm saying, do you, you arrogant little prick? You're the only one who can sort infected from uninfected. If you'd gone through there, what choice would you have left us the next time a truck full of people rolled through that fence? What choice would we have, would I have, but to burn each and every one of them? You crawling into that hole would have doomed every man and woman who got shoved through that gate, bro. And you'd have condemned me to have to do the killing in the name of protecting the other 300 swinging dicks who are trying to stay alive in this quarantine. I get to live with the final expression of every face I put that gun in for the rest of my life. To smell their fucking skin and hair burning every night for the rest of my life. And I bet you never even paused 3 seconds to consider that. I don't know. Amy. And if you'd made it through and the feds started raining death on this end of the tunnel, all you'd have felt is relief. You'd never have given us a second thought. It's all about saving your own ass. And that tells me that you're going to sabotage this operation again the first chance you get, for whatever selfish reason pops into your fat, arrogant head. And that means we can't trust your judgment to be our Spider-Man anymore. And that means that as long as you're alive and walking around in here, the 270 men and women in this quarantine are in danger. Is there anybody standing here, including you, Wong, who can make a convincing argument otherwise? No one spoke. Not even me. The wind howled. The bonfire whooshed and crackled. I looked into the fire, and the burning eyes of 24 charred skulls stared back at me. I said, "Nope." Mop up. Amy spun out of her seat and crawled to the rear of the RV, knees and hand crunching over cubes of safety glass. She knocked aside the spilled laptop. Her knee crushed a box of Pop-Tarts. She crawled and crawled, and eventually ran out of RV. She turned over and pressed her back against the rear wall. She pulled up her knees and made herself as small as possible. Frigid air blew in from the busted windshield, and it felt like the tears and sweat were freezing solid on her face. She huddled in the cold and the darkness, staring at the dismembered and lifeless corpse of Frito, the RV driver. His right foot was twitching. She couldn't take her eyes off of it. The driver's side door yanked open. Amy screamed. Frito's corpse was yanked out into the night. She screamed again. She pulled her knees tighter and twisted her hair in her fingers and squeezed her eyes shut and tried to make it all go away. There were tearing and smacking sounds from outside, set to the tune of the open door chime from the RV. She needed to get out, to run, to hide, or to get behind the wheel and stomp on the gas. Instead, she balled herself tighter and clenched her eyelids. Inhuman feet crunched through the glass in front of her. Warmth spread across her thighs, and she wet herself for the first time since she was 5 years old. The steps came closer and closer, crackling through the broken glass until she could feel warm breath on her cheek. Book 3. Posted on freerepublic.com by user Daryl Lombard, November 11th, 1:31 p.m. They laughed. They laughed when I stocked up on canned goods. They laughed when I stocked up on ammunition. They laughed when I said the storm clouds were gathering. Same as they laughed at Noah. And, as with Noah, they come clawing at my door as the flood rolls in. Sorry. This is why I was building an ark while you were doing drugs and watching reality TV. I appreciate all the prayers and expressions of concern from you over the last week. For those of you who don't know, I live not 3 miles outside of Outbreak Ground Zero in Undisclosed. But we are safe because we have prepared. We have food to last a year. We have water from our own well. We have fuel to last 3 years. We have guns, and everyone in our family is trained to use them. On the day of outbreak, one of my sons, the musician, druggy friends, and his little girlfriend came by. You can picture him even without my description. Long hair, covered in tattoos, track marks on his arms, showing early signs of HIV infection. A pro-atheism bumper sticker on his car. He wanted to shack up with us, eat our food, drink our water, sleep under our protection while the pestilence and depravity ran rampant outside. I pulled him aside by his scrawny arm and said, "What can you do?" He looks at me with that slack-jawed look and says, "What do you mean, dude?" I mean, what can you do? Can you shoot a rifle accurately at 50 yards? Do you know how to gut an animal? Or make a fishing net and clean what you catch? Can you fertilize a garden? Or purify water? Can you repair a small engine? Or even gap and change a spark plug? Can you wire an electrical outlet? Repair a roof when it leaks? Set a broken bone? Can you make your own clothes? Field strip and clean a rifle? Reload ammunition from spent brass? Disinfect and sew shut a wound? Of course, he said he didn't know how to do any of these things. He had spent his life playing video games and doing drugs and had probably fathered 5 welfare babies, demanding the whole time that I pay for their health care. When a pipe leaks, he calls the landlord, at best. Or, more likely, just lets it leak. Let the next tenant find out the floorboards have rotted and that every wall is covered with mold. His little girlfriend would be the type to cry about rats for animals because she thinks meat grows in the grocery store display counter. Smoking pot and spitting on our soldiers when they return home from fighting terrorists because she lives obviously in a little cocoon built from our sweat and blood and tears. I said to him, "Imagine there's a meteor coming to destroy the world, but some rich men have pooled their resources and built a big rocket ship to get people off the planet. They don't have room for everybody, but you want a seat on that ship. Now, your having a seat means somebody else doesn't get one. Space is limited. Food is limited. What would you tell the man standing at the door? What case would you make for getting a seat on that rocket ship at the expense of another person? What can you offer that would justify the food you would eat, and the water you would drink, and the medicine you would use? He said to me, I don't know, dude. I don't see no spaceship here. And I said, what you didn't realize was that you were always in that situation. Only the spaceship is planet Earth, and your creator built it for you, and you had your whole life to make your case for why you should be allowed to stay. Instead, you did drugs and played video games and collected welfare. Well, this ship is taking off without you. That boy walked away without a word. Maybe I'll see him and his little girlfriend again, out among the diseased and the starving, running from the riots and the chaos. And I will say, you had your chance. All your life, those crazy preachers were trying to tell you that the day of reckoning was coming. You chose to ignore it. Now, it's too late. This is the way it should be. There are two kinds of people in the world, producers and parasites. When a society gets too many parasites, we need the disaster, the tsunami, the earthquake, the war, the flood, the disease to wash away the garbage, to rinse the safety nets of the slugs that use them as a hammock. Let them fall into the fire, so that the strong, the faithful, and the capable will be left behind to rebuild and renew humanity. That day has come. They laughed at me when I stocked up on food and fuel and ammunition. Well, who's laughing now? "12 hours until the aerial bombing of Undisclosed." John was rocked out of unconsciousness by the blast of a shotgun and the warm splash of brains in his hair. Hands were grabbing him from all over, tugging at the spindly legs of the unholy daddy-long-legs creature. When he was free of the monster, John rolled over and saw a cowboy-looking dude in incredibly tight pants, holding a smoking, double-barrel shotgun. He was wearing earmuffs. The crowd of people standing around John were surprisingly human-looking for infected, and were pretty well dressed for zombies. The cowboy said, "You all right, buddy?" John couldn't think of how to answer that. His ribs hurt, and it was kind of hard to breathe. The back of his neck was wet with monster blood, and he had gotten all worked up anticipating his own mortality, only to find out it was on back order. He needed a drink so badly he was wondering if there was a gas station nearby that pumped ethanol, and if there would be a way to crawl into the underground tank. 3 burly guys were wrestling the spider monster. The human head at the center was shattered from the shotgun blast, but the parasite inside was still thrashing for life. A massive pickup truck sporting dual wheels and flared rear fenders backed up in the street. There was some kind of machine in the bed. A big red thing with a motor and chutes and wheels. Somebody started it. It sounded like a lawnmower. Only when they started cramming the giant squirming daddy longlegs into the chute did John realize it was a wood chipper. There was that terrible shriek, and red slush went spraying into the neighbor's yard. When the last of the creature's 8 legs vanished into the jaws of the machine, John thought, well, that's one way to do it. John tried to get up, but Cowboy pointed the shotgun and said, "Now, just stay seated for a minute, if you don't mind." From behind John, Falconer barked, "I'm a cop, asshole. See that on my belt? That's a badge. Falconer was marched over and forced to sit next to John. Holy shit. Did he look pissed? Cowboy pulled down his earmuffs and said, "Just to be clear, I got nothing but respect for law enforcement, officer. Detective. But at this point in time, I'm pretty sure that what you see here is all the law that exists in this town at this here moment. When the feds huddled up behind their barricades on the other side of town, it came down to us to walk these here streets. And now that they left town altogether, well, we're pretty sure that makes this our town. At least until we hear different." Falconer said, "I understand. Now, you tell me specifically what needs to occur before you let me continue what I was doing." "Well, you need to convince us you're not a zombie." John said, "Do we look like zombies? Ain't you heard? The zombies look just like everybody else." Falconer said, "This is all some huge prank, isn't it? Is somebody filming my reaction to put up on the internet?" "Now," Cowboy said, "the infection takes root in the mouth. That much we know. Then it spreads to the brain and then the rest of the body. So, there's a real simple test. We have to take something out of your mouth. If you're infected, you won't feel it because it's not really part of your body. If you're clean, it'll hurt like hell. So, I'll let you pick." From his back pocket, Cowboy pulled out a pair of vice grip pliers. "We can take a tooth." From his other back pocket, he produced a 6-inch long pair of pruning shears. Or a piece of tongue. 11 hours, 45 minutes, until the aerial bombing of Undisclosed. I was locked in a supply closet while the Reds gathered to discuss execution methods. I didn't care. It had all gone wrong. The kind of wrong that not even Owen properly understood. Otherwise, he'd realize he was about to give me a cleaner end than most people on Earth were going to get over the coming weeks, and months, and years, including him. Amy was my only regret. I just wished I knew that she was safe. And if so, that I could get word to her not to come after me. Even if she had made it out of town, Amy wouldn't just leave the situation alone. She and I had that in common. Can't stand to be on the other side of a fence from where we want to be. Not a fence somebody else put there, anyway. I wish there was a way to tell her all of that in person. To hug her, feeling her warmth and smelling the fruity shampoo in her hair. If I had that, and if I could hear her laugh one last time, I could carry that with me into eternity, and that would be okay. I kept trying to think back to everything that had happened since I woke up with that spider thing biting me in bed, trying to figure out what I was supposed to have done differently. It was stupid, I knew. Questioning how my life would have gone if I hadn't made bad choices was like a fish asking how his life would have turned out if he'd only followed through on his dream to play in the NBA. I don't beat myself up over my choices. My shame circuits burned out from overuse years ago. Wait. This started before the spider showed up in your bed. See, That was the thing, right there. I'd been so busy running around since that night that I'd never really had a chance to stop and put it all together. There was a common thread through all of these events that stretched back, even before that night. Tennant. Goddamn Dr. Bob Tennant. He shows up in my life as my supposed court-appointed paranoia therapist, asking me about monsters and trying to get me to work through all that shit. Then, the spider shows up and starts spreading this infection. And who's there the whole time, showing up at quarantine? Dr. Tennant. Monitoring the situation, watching it unfold, tapping away at his laptop and recording his observations. Anyway, so there's two things I wish I could take care of before my execution. People have died with longer to-do lists. I leaned my head against the wall and tried to make myself smell shampooed red hair instead of hospital sadness chemicals. I dozed off. 11 hours, 40 minutes, until the aerial bombing of Undisclosed. John was actually weighing the tooth or tongue options when Falconer said to Cowboy, "Let me say this as a red-blooded, not possessed by any kind of inhuman organism, all-American man. If you get near my mouth with either of those tools, I'm going to shove your head into the ground so hard a Chinaman will see it fly out of a volcano." Before Cowboy could react, John said, "Hold on. Do you know who this is next to me? This is Detective Lance Falconer." Cowboy looked like he sort of recognized the name, but couldn't place it. John said, "You can't tell me you haven't seen him on the news. He caught the Portland Strangler." From behind Cowboy, a lady said, "Oh my God, it is him." "Show them your ID, Detective." Falconer did. The lady was duly impressed. John said, "We were kinda in the middle of getting to the bottom of this whole thing when you showed up." Tight Pants Cowboy said, "Is that right?" John said, "Yeah, that is right. It's looking like the government is behind it all." Tight Pants cursed and said, "Son of a bitch. I've been saying that since day one. Day one." To the guy next to him, "Haven't I?" Falconer said, "I'm standing up now." He did. No one objected. A kid in the crowd said, "What's it like to fight somebody on top of a train?" Wendy, to Tight Pants, "What do you mean the feds left town? When?" "Breach of their headquarters. Something blew up. You didn't hear it?" "Oh," said John. We're wondering what that was." "Convoy heading out right now. So now we gotta do what they couldn't. Which is the way it always winds up. Which is why I've been saying it since day one. Me and my brother went door to door within 2 hours of the feds roping off the town, gathering up everybody with a gun and a set of balls. We're the ones who got shit back under control, not the soldiers tripping around in their spacesuits. We're the ones who put a stop to the looting. We're the ones who have been patrolling the streets every minute of every day, in shifts, outside of the so-called green zone the feds set up. There's almost 200 of us now, working in 3 shifts. Round the clock, pumping buckshot into zombies and feeding them to Chip back there.
making sure everybody outside that hospital is clean. Everybody who ain't gets put down. And making sure that hospital stays sealed off until the president grows the balls to drop a couple dozen cruise missiles on it. This got John's attention. Wait, what? They're dropping cruise missiles? When? When they grow the balls, like I said. We don't have a more specific timeline on the balls situation? Are you asking because you want it to happen or because you don't want it to happen? Well, what about the people inside who aren't infected? We gotta get them out, right? Buddy, anybody that's spent a day inside that place is infected by now, 5 times over. If there's anybody alive in there, they ain't human no more. That's the only thing we know about the infection. Once you get it, there ain't no cure. You're walking dead. If you got people you care about in there, you need to treat them just like you saw them go into the ground yourself. Picture the dirt going in over the casket. Take time to mourn. Do what you gotta do. But you gotta get past that. Feeling sorry for them? It's like feeling sorry for the fire that's burning down your house. These infected, they'll say anything at all, to make you let your guard down. They can look just like you and me, can talk just like you and me, or your neighbor, or your best friend, or your mama. But you cannot hesitate. Think of them just like a parrot imitating human speech. The words sound the same, but they ain't got no soul inside. You come face to face with them, you cannot hesitate. Nearby, somebody said, "Fucking A." Falconer said, "See, that just makes me more pissed off at the bastards who are going to get away with this. They're going to turn all the victims to ashes and sweep it all under the rug. Somebody needs to answer for this shit." About 10 different people muttered, "Damn right," or something to that effect. Tight Pants said, "Tell me what you need, detective." "As you see, I'm gonna need a ride. Unless you know a tire shop that's open." "What the hell we waiting for? Hop in the truck." To another guy, Tight Pants said, "Tell Bobby to follow me. Everybody else should finish their sweep. We're behind enough as it is. Don't forget to check in on Eve Bartlett. Make sure she's got her insulin okay." The crowd started to disperse. John didn't move from the spot where he was sitting in the yard. Falconer said, "You coming?" "Dave is alive. I saw him when I was on the sauce earlier. I'm gonna go find my car and see what I can do." The look on Falconer's face told John that he thought he was looking at a dead man, but knew that there was also no point in trying to talk John out of it. Instead, Falconer shook John's hand and said, "Don't fuck everything up, okay?" 3 hours, 10 minutes, until the aerial bombing of Undisclosed. The supply closet door was yanked open, and I awoke to see Owen there with his co-chair, Mr. Gunn. They led me to the yard, and I found that it was morning. I had managed to sleep several hours among the mops and buckets, exhaustion catching up with me. The group of Reds had swelled, huddled around the bonfire to hear my sentence. Owen said to me, "We figure we'll give you the choice, bro. You can either crawl through that steam tunnel and whatever happens, happens. Or I can shoot you right here and let your fat ass fuel the fire. It's all the same to me. Aside from the second option, setting me back one bullet. I shook my head and said, "Nah, that tunnel smelled like a graveyard for dog shit. Am I allowed a piece of paper and a pen to write a note to my girlfriend, if she's even still alive? No idea how she's ever going to see it, but I'd feel bad if I didn't make the effort. You know, like when you forget to call home on Mother's Day." Owen didn't answer because he was looking past me. Something deep in my nasal passages noted that the scent of the smoke took on a more sophisticated tone. Instead of the meaty smell of barbecue mixed with the acrid smell of particle board and veneer, I suddenly smelled the sweet, rich fragrance of pipe tobacco. I turned, and there was Dr. Marconi, puffing on his pipe with one hand dipped into the jacket pocket of a pinstripe suit. He looked so out of place here he seemed like a hologram. Marconi said, "Can I ask what this gathering is about?" I said, I've been sentenced to die, but Owen here has agreed to let me write a note to Amy before he shoots me." Marconi nodded and said, "I see. You do realize, David, that other men do not find themselves in this kind of predicament with the same frequency that you do. I'm beginning to think it's something you're doing." To Owen, he said, "Can I wait 15 minutes? I would like to pull Mr. Wong aside and take him up to my floor. I actually believe I'm on the verge of a breakthrough with detection, but I'll need his skill this one last time." No answer from Owen. Marconi said, "It really is for the good of all of us, if it works. You can stand right outside my door, if you think this is a ruse to help him escape, though I personally cannot imagine what such a plan would entail. It would also give him the chance to confess his sins, so it would be a personal favor to me. As a former man of the cloth, it would weigh on me greatly if I didn't at least offer him the opportunity." Owen pointed the gun at the sky and said, "If it was anybody but you, Doc." "You know I do not ask lightly." To me, he said, "Will you take this opportunity to let me show you something? And to reconcile yourself with the Creator you're about to meet?" "3 hours until the aerial bombing of Undisclosed." John jolted awake to find himself staring down a shotgun wielded by his greatest enemy, himself. He had fallen asleep in the caddy, his shotgun in his lap. He must have shifted position at some point. If he'd coughed, he'd have vaporized his own skull. The sun stared angrily through his windshield. John blinked and threw open the driver's side door, needing to get out and take a piss. He almost fell and broke his neck. The caddy was sitting 6 feet off the ground. Then he remembered. The night before, he'd parted company with the undisclosed zombie militia and made the nervous trek on foot from Dave's house up to the burrito stand, only to find the caddy was not in fact where they'd left it. At that point, his only possible hope of finding it again was if it had gotten towed away, back at a stage of the apocalypse when a car partially blocking the street was still considered a priority on somebody's list. John jogged 12 blocks to the towing company impound yard, expecting to be decapitated by a monster at any moment. The good news was that he wasn't. The further good news was that the caddy was in fact there, and that the tall fence had been cut open by some other looter or vandal days ago. The bad news was that the Caddy was apparently the last seized vehicle before towing was shut down. It was still on the back of the tow truck. The truck was the flatbed type, where the whole bed tilted down to form a ramp and let the car roll on and off. A technology that probably came about because the old hook style yanked off too many bumpers in the course of dragging cars out of handicapped parking spaces. John had jumped up onto the truck bed and opened the Caddy's trunk, expecting to find that everything had been stolen. But apparently, even the looters who ransacked the impound yard took one glance at the rusting piece of shit and deduced that there could be nothing in the trunk worth the effort of prying it open. That was probably a good thing for both the citizens and law enforcement of Undisclosed. Inside, they'd have found the aforementioned shotgun, a custom-made triple-barrel sawed-off, 200 shells, Dave's blood-splattered chainsaw, the green mystery box taken from Dave's shed, a bag of Dave's clothes, a bottle of Grey Goose, and a bad black velvet painting of Jesus, and a fucking flamethrower. The keys had still been in the tow truck. In fact, the driver's side door was standing open from when the driver had run screaming from whatever mob or unholy terror was coming his way. John spent 20 minutes trying to figure out the controls for tilting the down ramp and never could. It was either take the tow truck itself or walk. So, for the third time in 10 days, he commandeered a vehicle for use in a mission, promising himself he would return it when it was over. He was 1 for 2 so far. That is how John wound up spending the night tooling around town in the tow truck with the Caddy piggybacking. One thing he had noticed when he was out: people. Lots of people. Since Reaper had retreated and stopped enforcing the curfew, every street corner had grown clumps of people bristling with hunting rifles and shotguns and revolvers and machetes. John was comforted by that for about 5 seconds. Then he saw the looks in the eyes of these harried, tired, cold, frustrated people, and realized they would butcher his ass if he even so much as let out a yawn that sounded too much like a moan. Just before dawn, John had passed the quarantine, which looked even more impregnable than it had with time on pause. Floodlights and armed drones were all powered up and standing guard. Driving slow to avoid the armed crowds that were wandering across the streets, John had made his way up to the asylum. A crowd was busy up there. Dozens of members of the militia were surrounding an RV parked in the yard. The pickup with the wood chipper was parked next to a long ditch that had been dug in the yard, and the chipper was running. John had edged closer, as close as he could without exiting the tow truck, which he was not gonna fucking do, and saw bodies. The militia was dragging them out of a basement window and laying them in a row in the grass. Another crew was picking them up, one by one, and feeding them into the chipper. The chipper was, in turn, filling the ditch with red slush. Oh, holy mother of... John had heard a scream at that point, and saw a gang of militia approaching from the street, dragging a cursing man covered in tattoos. He was thrashing around and lobbing insults at his captors, insisting on his innocence and his humanity. The captors conferred with Tight Pants Cowboy, who was in charge of the zombie disposal operation apparently. The tattooed man's trial lasted 45 seconds. Then, Cowboy vaporized the man's forehead with 2 shotgun shells. Into the chipper he went. John got the fuck out of there. He had headed as far outside of town as he could get without running into the Reaper barricades. So, John had parked the tow truck, with the caddy piggybacking, in a cornfield a mile or so from the water tower construction site. The Reaper barricade now standing between there and where he'd spoken to Dave for the last time. He had gotten drowsy, then climbed up to the caddy because he figured the higher vantage point would give him an advantage if he was ambushed while he slept. John sat upright and worked his stiff joints. He threw the shotgun into the passenger seat where it clinked off the empty Grey Goose bottle. The gun was a custom-made job he'd bought at one of the gun shows he frequented. It wasn't pretty, but it worked. Firing all 3 barrels would chop down a small tree. He kept double-aught buck loaded into the 2 side barrels and a slug in the middle. Give the target a nice variety of projectiles to think about. He needed to get into quarantine, and not as a patient either. He needed to get in there with the implements of destruction in the caddy's trunk. John pictured himself just plowing toward the fence in the tow truck, but remembered the concrete barricades meant to stop somebody from doing just that. Well, sitting here was accomplishing nothing. John jumped down, pissed for several minutes, then threw himself into the tow truck. 2 hours, 45 minutes, until the aerial bombing of Undisclosed. Marconi led me up to the 2nd floor with Owen in tow. He made Owen stay outside of the makeshift hospital within a hospital, telling him there was a risk of him spreading the nasty stomach flu to the rest of the quarantine. Once, on the other side of the door, Marconi muttered, "We have less time than I thought." What, before Owen shoots me? No. Believe it or not, that's actually not our most pressing problem. He led me to a window and said, "Look, beyond the fence." I did. A freaking crowd was gathering out there. Holy shit, Doctor. Who are those people? Looks like everyone. Hundreds of people. Cars were parked here and there, scattered like toys out beyond the fence. People were sitting on the hoods, or were off in bunches talking. Everyone seemed to have a gun. I swear one person actually brought a pitchfork. Marconi said, "Your neighbors, your coworkers, the people who mow your lawn and deliver your mail." Nobody mows my lawn. I don't understand. Critical mass, Mr. Wong. They're going to get what they wanted, and I haven't the faintest idea of how to stop it. Who? Who's going to get what they wanted? The mob, you mean? Marconi looked me in the eye and said, "We're speaking in private. I assume that we can drop all pretense. This conversation will take longer if we filter everyone through a facade of skepticism of the supernatural, and at least one of us doesn't have the time. If I have seen the shadow men lurking about, then I assume you have, too." I sighed and said, "Yeah, I have." So when I speak of an invisible they working against us, you'll not waste precious seconds asking who they are. The shadows and the men who knowingly or unknowingly work on their behalf. They. I often wondered if they had an office building somewhere where they sat around a long black granite conference table with a pentagram etched onto the top. Or maybe they had a headquarters inside a hollowed out volcano like a James Bond villain. Or maybe they had the technology to leap effortlessly across time and space, holding shareholder meetings on the surface of Mars, or on top of a plateau in Pangaea circa 200 million BC. John and I knew very little about them, which made me an expert when compared to the general population, who don't know they exist at all. They are people, or at least they assume the form of people. They are wealthy, or at least have access to wealth, or maybe have means which render wealth as we understand it moot. The little Asian man who disappeared into the burrito stand was surely one of them, as was whoever was waiting for that convoy of black trucks we saw last summer. But all I have are rumors. Stories John dug up on the internet, probably written by people who know even less than we do. Some say it's a cabal of wealthy men who, centuries ago, poured their wealth into experimentation with the occult. At some point, the story goes, they tapped into a dark power that they saw as one more resource to be exploited, the way that humans would later learn to split the atom and use it to power our televisions and hair dryers. Instead, the legend goes, the dark energies that poured forth infected them, corrupting these men who learned too late that the power they had bought would cost them the last remnants of their own souls. That's the story, anyway. Shit. For all I know, they wrote that version of the story and the truth is another 3 layers down. That's how they work. These days, if you ask John to summarize who they are, you get only one answer. Well, they're not fucking vampires, I'll tell you that. Then he'll stare hard at you for a solid minute until you walk away. Marconi tapped the side of one of the jugs that contained the spider specimens. It didn't react, but still, I wished he wouldn't do it. He said, "This was always chess, not checkers." I'm not sure you ever fully understood that. I said, "Tennant. You know that name?" Claims to be a psychiatrist, but suddenly turns up consulting for this agency nobody's ever heard of. Reaper? Oh. He's a psychiatrist. Search his past and you'll find 25 distinguished years in that profession. An expert on the virulent nature of fear. And likewise, if it just so happened that he needed to be a plumber, in order to be in an advantageous position to observe and influence the situation, then you would find a quarter century of plumbing in his background, and so on. He would be whatever is required. Can't somebody investigate him? If his licenses and all that are fake, then... I didn't say he would use false documents. I said he would actually have 25 years on the job. Whatever job. Do you understand? Again, chess. With a very advanced player who can see many moves ahead. They put their pieces into position. Marconi checked the vitals on a sleeping patient as he spoke, puffing on his pipe the whole time. I again wondered to what degree Dr. Marconi actually knew anything about medicine. He said, "In the case of Dr. Tennant, he not only has specialized in treating violent and paranoid patients since the 1980s, but has written multiple prominent books on the subject, and dozens of journal articles. More pertinent to this situation, he has also written extensively on the subject of group paranoia and crowd dynamics in crisis situations. He didn't have to infiltrate the government. When the outbreak hit, they came to him. Do you understand? The pieces are always positioned where they need them. Right. And they are dicks. But we can't stop there. We need to ask the big question. What do they want? To kill us all? We should be blessed with an adversary with such uncomplicated ambitions. No, war is never about killing the enemy. War is about remaking the world to suit the whims of some powerful group over the whims of some other powerful group. The dead are just the sparks that fly from the metal as they grind it down. 2 hours, 40 minutes, until the aerial bombing of Undisclosed. John didn't get within 3 blocks of the hospital quarantine. There were people everywhere. It was like the afternoon of the 4th of July, when everybody ambles out to the park in loose groups to find a place to watch fireworks. Only instead of carrying blankets and lawn chairs, everybody was armed to the teeth. From the driver's seat of the tow truck, John recognized a familiar cowboy hat and denim-wrapped ass walking nearby. John pulled up to where Tight Pants Cowboy was on the sidewalk, shouting orders to somebody. John rolled down the window and Tight Pants said, "Did Hank send you out here? We're still 4 short." John said, No. Is Falconer around?" "The detective? He went off on his own. Said he had to follow up on a lead." Shit. Hey, what is all this? It's the end of the world. Where you been all week? What? What's your name again? John. Yours? Jimmy Dupree. Pleased to meet you. We're making sure the quarantine holds until the Air Force can blow the shit out of it in about 2 hours, 35 minutes, until the aerial bombing of Undisclosed. Marconi said, "I mentioned my book earlier, The Babel Threshold." "Yeah, I said I hadn't read it. I usually wait for the movie." "Try to focus, please. Do you understand the significance of the title? You know the Tower of Babel, right? You went to Sunday school." "Yeah, sure. In ancient times, everybody on earth spoke the same language. Then they decided to build a tower that would reach all the way up to heaven. Then God cursed everybody on the job site to each speak a different language to mess them up." "Exactly. And the Lord came down to see the city and the tower, which the children of men buildeth. And the Lord said, Behold, the people is one, and they have all one language. And this they begin to do. And now nothing will be restrained from them. Let us go down, and there confound their language." It's right there in the text, Mr. Wong. God's motivation in that story is that he was afraid. He limited our ability to communicate because he was afraid that, operating as one, we would challenge his power. Man, I hope you're not about to tell me that all this shit is some curse from God because we built our buildings too tall. Kind of a flat town to impose that lesson on. You'd think he'd take it to Dubai. No, but there is a parallel. Are you familiar with Dunbar's number? No. You should. It governs every moment of your waking life. It is our Tower of Babel. The restraint that governs human ambition isn't a lack of a unified language. It's Dunbar's number. Named after a British anthropologist named Robin Dunbar. He studied primate brains and their behavior in groups. And he found something that will change the way you think about the world. He found that the larger the primate's neocortex, the larger the communities it formed. It takes a lot of brain to process all of the relationships in a complex society, you see. When primates find themselves in groups larger than what their brains can handle, the system breaks down. Factions form. Wars break out. Now, and do pay attention, because this is crucial. You can actually look at a primate brain and, knowing nothing else about what species it came from, you can predict how big their tribes are. Does Owen have a watch? Because when you told him 15 minutes, I'm not sure if he's going to take that as a literal 15 minutes or... We'll deal with him in a moment, but I take your point. The salient issue here is that every primate has a number. Marconi gestured to the crowd gathering outside of the fence. Including those primates out there. Including you and I. Based on the size of a human's neocortex, that number is about 150. That's how many other humans we can recognize before we max out our connections. With some variability among individuals, of course. That is our maximum capacity for sympathy. I stared at him. I said, wait, really? Like there's an actual part of our brain that dictates how many people we can tolerate before we start acting like assholes? Congratulations. Now you know the single reason why the world is the way it is. You see the problem right away. Everything we do requires cooperation in groups larger than 150. Governments, corporations, society as a whole. And we are physically incapable of handling it. So every moment of the day, we urgently try to separate everyone on Earth into two groups. Those inside the sphere of sympathy and those outside. Black versus white. Liberal versus conservative. Muslim versus Christian. Lakers fan versus Celtics fan. With us or against us. Infected versus clean. We simplify tens of millions of individuals down into simplistic stereotypes so that they hold the space of only one individual in our limited available memory slots. And here is the key. Those who lie outside the circle are not human. We lack the capacity to recognize them as such. This is why you feel worse about your girlfriend cutting her finger than you do about an earthquake in Afghanistan that kills 100,000 people. This is what makes genocide possible. This is what makes it possible for a CEO to sign off on a policy that will poison a river in Malaysia and create 10,000 deformed infants. Because of this limitation in the mental hardware, those Malaysians may as well be ants. I stared at the crowd outside and rubbed my forehead. Or monsters. Ah. Now, you're getting it. It's the same as how that crowd out there doesn't see us as human. The way the rest of the country won't see anyone inside city limits as human. The way the rest of the world soon won't regard anyone in this country as human. The paranoia rippling outward until the whole planet is engulfed. This infection, this parasite that dehumanizes the host but is utterly undetectable. It is perfectly designed to play on this fundamental flaw. This limitation in our hardware. That will be the real infection. Marconi emptied his pipe into a bedpan and pulled out a bag of tobacco. Which brings us back to the Tower of Babel. Humans were always destined to be derailed by this limitation in our ability to cooperate. At some specific point, determined by the overall size of the population on the planet and a host of other factors, we will destroy ourselves. That is the Babel threshold. The point at which the species' wide exhaustion of human sympathy reaches critical mass. And you think this whole thing, starting with me finding a giant alien spider in my bed, was their plan to trigger that event? He nodded. The parasite's ability to stay undercover indefinitely, the infected showing absolutely no symptoms. It's perfection. Anyone can be infected at any moment, anywhere in the world. If you want to see what the future of life on this planet Earth looks like, simply take a glance out that window. I found a chair and collapsed into it. There was a harsh knock on the door behind me. From behind the door, Owen said, "All right, it's been long enough, Doc." 5 more minutes won't change anything, Mr. Barber. Lowering my voice, I said, "Wait, you wrote a book about this happening before it happened? Damn, why didn't you send me a copy?" "You shouldn't have needed a book to see this coming. No one should have. This is what they've been building towards since civilization began, accelerating as it got closer, like the last sand running from an hourglass. Look at the games children play now. The average child has killed 10,000 men on a video game screen by the time he enters high school, reinforcing the lesson one button press at a time. The shapes at the other end of your gun are not human. And when news of the infection spread, what did the world immediately call the infected? Zombies. Exactly. Our culture's most perfect creation. An enemy you are absolutely morally correct in killing because they are already dead. Why, you're doing them a favor by smashing in their skulls. We as a species were so primed for this that to get combustion, they only needed the tiniest spark. It actually happened sooner than I expected, but... He shrugged as he lit his pipe, as if to say, can't be right every time. I said, "Well, you took a long time to say what I pretty much already knew. We're screwed. I mean, to be clear, we're rooting for the bombs, right? That's the only way to satisfy the paranoia. Let them blow all this to shit on live TV while the mob out there cheers." Marconi puffed on his pipe and stared out the window. I said, "I mean, we absolutely cannot let that part get out, right? The fact that the zombies are undetectable until they're biting your brain? The fact needs to die with the quarantine. Otherwise, it's going to be a global lynch mob out there. Which means making sure none of them get out, even if innocents die in the process. I mean, it's shitty, but that's all we can do. Err on the side of overkill, right?" Marconi said, "The sedative is running out. One of my infected patients woke up." I said, "Jesus, really? Did you?" "I've been talking to him all morning. He's still strapped to his bed." I calmly explained to him the situation, and he asked me to leave the restraints on. He said it was the only responsible thing. What do you make of that? I don't know. But you can't just leave him like... You're right. I can't. I mean, it's just a matter of time, right? Until he monsters out and kills who knows how many people? Marconi studied me. Owen banged on the door. Again. Marconi said, "We're coming." "2 hours, 30 minutes, until the aerial bombing of Undisclosed." To Tight Pants, a.k.a. Jimmy Dupree, John said, "So we know for sure now. They're going to bomb it?" Jimmy nodded. "And you're the one who was asking earlier about the innocent people inside quarantine." "I got a friend in there." "No, you don't. What this is, with the bombs, is a mercy killing. Nothing more. You need to get that straight." Staring through the windshield at the fence down the street, John nodded. Dupree said, "Don't know if you heard the shots last night, but there was an outbreak from the quarantine. A bunch of them found an old utility tunnel that the government, in its infinite wisdom, failed to spot on the blueprints. A few dozen tried to get out. Looked like some militia tried to stand their ground and got themselves torn to pieces in the process. Don't got any idea how many zombies got out into the wild, but I spent my night disposing of 30 bodies. There'll be more. A lot more. If they don't do something about that quarantine, it's a bag of live snakes in a nursery." Well, word finally filtered in from the feds of the perimeter. The bomb drops at noon. We just got to keep it secure until then. Then, this whole flippin' nightmare will be over. And if noon comes and nothing happens, we're going to surround this place and pour bullets into that fence until nothing on the other side draws air. 2 hours, 25 minutes, until the aerial bombing of Undisclosed. I couldn't help but notice that Owen had the Reds build up the fire. Looks like they had found some more wooden pallets somewhere. That shit really burned. To Owen, I said, "You know what? I never got to sit down and write that note to my girlfriend. Marconi used up all my time, and all he did was give me a chili recipe. You want it?" He didn't answer. It was a beautiful morning, though some clouds were moving in. I could actually hear birds chirping somewhere. Birds don't give a shit about the apocalypse any more than we'd care about some species of bird going extinct in the Amazon. Which had probably happened twice already this morning. All of the Reds were awake and standing around me. I looked back at the hospital entrance and saw a smattering of Greens standing there. I glanced up at the roof, and there were the rest of them, lined up along the ledge and looking down. From behind me, Marconi said, "Mr. Barber, I don't know if you can hear the commotion on the other side of the fencing, but we do appear to have a larger problem here." Owen said, "With all due respect, Doc, I'm not a fucking idiot. Those people are about to riot out there because they figured out this quarantine isn't secure thanks to last night's breakout. And guess who we have to thank for that? Killing David here will not assuage their panic. It will, in fact, accomplish nothing except to confirm their worst fears about us." "Attention!" Everybody turned. "Please move 1,000 feet away from the quarantine fence. For your safety, please withdraw from the quarantine perimeter to a distance of at least 1,000 feet. 2 hours, 20 minutes, until the aerial bombing of Undisclosed. John heard the PA system outside the fence announcing something he couldn't quite make out from inside the truck. Warning the crowd away from the gates, probably. He pulled the tow truck up through the quarantined crowd, gently knocking over a "Do not cross by order of Reaper, highly infectious. Trespassers will be shot on sight" sign. Beyond it were 4-foot-high concrete barricades. Beyond them was an unmanned jeep with a mounted gun that John assumed would shoot anyone who touched the fence. Beyond it, the fence itself. For all he knew, Dave could be no more than 50 feet away, on the other side of that chain link. A cheap pair of bolt cutters would get through it in 2 minutes, but it might as well be the center of the earth. He needed a drink. They had a little over 2 hours until either the army incinerated this place or the entire town went apeshit on it. 2+ hours in which to accomplish what? The crowd was actually moving back, to his surprise. And then it dawned on him that the military was trying to get the rubberneckers out of the blast radius, or whatever they were going to drop on this place. He wondered if he was close enough to be engulfed by whatever came streaking down from the sky. He threw the truck into park. The PA system repeated its message. John lit one of his last 2 cigarettes. He twiddled with the levers on the console. He heard a humming from behind him, and a shadow inched across the cab. Oh, hey. He'd figured out how to work the stupid ramp mechanism. It'd have been nice to have done that before he was forced to steal some guy's tow truck, but that was how every single possible thing had gone so far in this situation. Just a little bit behind the curve. A little slow to figure out the right thing. Story of his fucking life. John realized at the very least he needed to get this poor bastard's tow truck out of the blast zone, and that leaving it here would be a major dick move considering he no longer needed it. John got out and climbed up onto the tilted truck bed, released the cable that secured the caddy, and got behind the wheel. He twisted the ignition and woke up the bear under the hood. He reversed off the truck bed, flattening out on the street below. Credence loudly assured him that a bad moon was rising.